Once upon a time, in the kingdom of Rankal, in the barony of Bourgeois, a large crowd of over 1,000 people gathered in the square. Those present discussed how a year had already passed and marveled at how quickly time flies. Everyone was curious to know how many would be chosen this year. Two men sat in one of the establishments and discussed the upcoming event. One of them said that if it were him, he would go to the other world. The other believed that if he succeeded, he could achieve great success. His companion asked if he would really risk his life. He replied, why not? If he passed the test, he would be rid of his commoner status and become a semi-aristocrat. He could become a knight, get rich, and leave. Meanwhile, a young man in the crowd thought about how he could control the pride of the kingdom of Rheinkal with the power of God Colossus. If he passed the pilot test, he could control the giant machine. Everyone who considered himself a man had to try it at least once. Approaching the announcement, he read that the test would be held in Baron Bourgeois' Square. At that moment, he overheard a conversation. One of the interlocutors asked how much blood he wanted to shed if he were to drive a giant machine. Then the young man was struck from behind and fell to the ground. Several young men behind him told him not to stand in the way of future pilots. One of them, named Thomas, grabbed the guy by the hair and asked how he dared to walk in front of the test site, or if he wanted to go to the other world. He was immediately surprised by the smell coming from him. His friends said that perhaps he had no one to take care of him. Saying that they were late, Thomas's friends called him to come with them. He left the boy, saying that it would be better if he didn't see that ugly face before the test. After a while, the Baron, who had already tested thousands of people, said that there was not a single worthy candidate and invited the next one. Another young man who tried to pass the test failed, and the Baron said to take him away because he was terrible. He yelled at the candidates that they were terrible and talentless and asked how long they were going to continue to embarrass themselves. He urged everyone to try to lift the magic stone and become a novice pilot of a giant machine. The Baron promised to reward the winners and their families. One of the spectators, hearing this, said that the reward was ridiculous. Another said that they were trying to impress the royal family with their candidates, and that the Baron was already getting angry because it wasn't working. For the sake of the test, they even stopped the factory, and now there were no more candidates. Everyone knew that the more children failed, the more labor there would be. Then Thomas stepped forward, called the others weaklings, and told them to look at him. Many people supported him, shouting that he was the strongest and that they knew he could do it. At that moment, he thought that such an opportunity does not come often and that this is not just a stone. Taking the magic stone in his hands, he thought that it was important and that it was his future and freedom. Putting incredible effort into lifting the stone, he thought that the peasant Thomas was no more, and now he would be Sir Thomas, Knight of the Kingdom. Seeing that he had lifted the stone to his chest, the spectators were very surprised because this was the first time such a thing had happened. One of the girls said that it was her friend Thomas. Hearing her words about his friend, Thomas mentally told her not to be ridiculous because now he no longer associated with the rabble. Meanwhile, the Baron, who was also watching what was happening, like the spectators, was surprised that Thomas was able to lift the stone, and Thomas, trying to lift it higher and higher, encouraged himself that this was his last chance to change his life. And finally, with one more effort, he was able to lift the magic stone above his head. Seeing this, the hooded young man mentally asked Thomas to stop and not lift the stone. And then unexpectedly, Thomas's body was struck by energy waves, and he fell, passing away. The spectators were shocked that the stone had taken his life. Some asked to stop the test, believing that they would all go to the other world. But the Baron ordered them all to be quiet, and reminding them that the kingdom was at war, called the next candidate. But literally a minute later, he noticed that there was no one left in the square, and he did not understand where everyone had gone. He shouted that they must have a good life, and that this was what he got for his kindness. Pointing his finger at a few people who were in horror, the Baron told them to come to him. But they said they were going to leave. Otherwise, they would end up like Thomas. And being a peasant wasn't so bad anymore. But when they approached the exit, they realized that it was blocked by the Baron's guards. While the guards forced the young men to return to the competition, the Baron said that they had a choice, either to rise up or to go to the other world. Everyone gathered again in the square, and the Baron said that those who were too weak for the test were a waste of money. Among the crowd was a young man in a hood who raised his hand. When people saw this, they began to say that he was crazy. Everyone turned and looked at him. Someone in the crowd said that this guy claimed to see ghosts and should be sent to the other world. The Baron also saw that he had raised his hand and immediately thought that he was just another poor man. The young man asked him to give him a chance. The spectators began to argue that it was not right to work all the time and that it was better to stay with his parents while they were still alive. He remembered his life, and it was rock bottom as he himself called it. He sat in the back alleys of the city, hungry and cold. Once he picked up some food that a drunk man passing by had thrown away and began to eat. At that moment, a young man jumped up to him and hit him, calling him a beggar who eats off the floor. His parents passed away when he was 10 years old. Since childhood, he had been haunted by strange visions and hallucinations. Neither the violence nor his hallucinations ever went away. It didn't matter whether his eyes were open or not, but he went through hell. The young man who beat him asked if he was seeing ghosts again. He told him not to come near their territory and hang out with other beggars like him. In the kingdom of Raincal, when a person turned 10, they received a name at a ceremony. But orphans did not undergo the ceremony, so he was called a moron. All this time he had been waiting for today, his 19th birthday. As the young men left, they discussed why Lieutenant Davis cared about someone like him. The young man thought about the fact that it was his birthday, but no one would even congratulate him. But that was normal for him. Standing on the railing and looking at the river, he thought about freeing himself from this life. He jumped into the water, thinking that now he was finally free from all the hatred and violence, from depression and fear, and from his hated body. As he sank deeper, he mentally said goodbye to all of it, including the kingdom of Raincal, which had not even given him a name. There, in the depths, he was still thinking about his name when he opened his eyes because he remembered. In his past life, he was the winner of Mr. Olympia from Korea, and now he remembered it. After the competition, a reporter asked him how he felt, since he was the first Asian to win this title. She asked if he had any special training and asked to touch his chest, which turned out to be very firm. He remembered that his name was Kang Go-han, and that he was a Korean bodybuilder. In an interview, he said that it wasn't difficult, and that you just had to do 3 exercises diligently. At that time, he won the world bodybuilding competition and had a wonderful life. He was the strongest man in the world with Korean muscles. He had a lot of TV appearances and photo shoots for magazines. His goal was to reach the highest level of natural training and become the strongest. It was enough to look at all those muscles in the reflection. Back then, he was a celebrity. Now he couldn't believe that it was really him. He was constantly surrounded by female fans who rushed towards him because they wanted to touch his muscles. Once he stood and looked at the largest hall in the country, and his comrades admired him. Remembering all this, Kang Ho-han thought that he took training seriously. His evening workouts were brutal and intense. As he left, he said goodbye to the employees who had worked hard. And now he thought about how he wanted to build the best muscles possible. His goal was to win 9 Mr. Olympia titles in a row, just like Lee Haney and Rooney Koeman. He remembered how he used to race down the road, and in that life and with those muscles, he was free. It was the feeling of being in complete control of his power, complete freedom, and a wonderful past life. And then he remembered how a truck was rushing towards him, and the collision was unavoidable. Kang Go-han woke up in horror and shouted that his past life could not end like this. At that moment, he saw the face of Lieutenant Davis in front of him, who said that he was right and that it couldn't end like that. He said that he had jumped into the river and asked if he really thought his life was worthless. At that moment, Kang Ho-han didn't understand why he had saved him. The lieutenant grabbed him by his clothes and asked how he would look his father in the eye when he himself went to the other world. Kang Ho-han saw tears in his eyes. But at that moment, he thought he could still see them. The memories of his past life seemed like a dream. And it ended like a dream. Looking at his hands, he wondered if he really was Kang Ho-han. He looked in the mirror while Lieutenant Davis told him not to let other people influence him and that he had to become a man and become strong. Kang Ho-han thought that even though his past life was over, he could try again. He was thin and weak, but he was only 19. He wasn't fat, and he didn't have an ounce of muscle, but he decided that he would grow bigger and more handsome. And the hallucinations he had seen all his life turned out to be a system window. He realized that he wasn't crazy, but he had a crazy skill. Lieutenant Davis tried to distract him from the mirror, but when he saw him holding his stomach, he thought he was hungry and ran away. He returned shortly after and handed him a plate, saying it was herbal soup and he needed to regain his strength. Looking at the plate, Kang Go-han opened the nutrition information window and read about the soup. Now he understood that he hadn't understood all this time because of Hangul, but everything became clear to him as soon as he remembered his past life. He was delighted and asked Davis if the giant pilot test would take place in a month. Davis replied that it would, but asked if he was sure. Jumping up and down with joy, Kang Go-han said it was a great idea, and that he himself had said he shouldn't live by other people's standards. As he ran away, he thought about how he had lived 19 terrible years, but he could still be successful if he did the same thing he did in his past life. Now he had a cheat window in the nutrition system and could become happy by building muscle. Thinking about all this, he jumped high. But after jumping, he immediately fell and, lying on the ground, remembered that he had low stamina and depression, and he would need more work than he thought. Climbing the mountain, he reasoned that he must first get rid of his depression and panic attacks. In the mountains, he found puria grass, which maintained serotonin levels in the brain. At that moment, he was 2 kilograms away from his daily serotonin requirement. Kang Gohan learned that a healthy spirit is not in the bones and that a real bodybuilder must understand anatomy, physiology, mechanics, and nutrition. As he gathered the herb, he thought that omega-3 and protein were alternatives to antidepressants, and that he should eat everything that was edible and healthy. After starting to eat the herb he had gathered, he thought that it would be difficult to find more anyway, but he was curious to see if he could eat 2 kilograms of puria every day. He felt sick because he hadn't eaten properly for almost 19 years, but Kang Ho-han also ate like that every day. Being the best in the world wasn't easy, but working in the factory was also good exercise for him. It was hard and intense work, but he had to think of it not as a 15-hour workday, but as excellent triceps training. He threw the cart down, even though another worker shouted at him not to throw it, and he happily thought that all that was left was the reward for muscle growth. And now, during the test, he thought about how it had been a month of hard work, but he had become stronger and hoped that it had not been in vain. Kang Ho-han climbed the stairs, and the spectators behind him did not understand what the smell was coming from him. One of the spectators picked up a bag that he had thrown away on the way, and sniffing it, decided that it was a strange smell. He thought it was the smell of urine and cursed. Kang Gohan thought about the fact that he had used a secret method involving smelly salt with the smell of ammonia. He learned that liquid ammonia is used by power lifters when they try to lift extreme weights. It causes the nervous system to become excited. Baron called him a weakling and told him that if he messed up, he would be responsible for his entire family and even his class. So he had to be ready. Standing in front of the magic stone, Kang Ho-han thought that he had bodybuilding skills that Thomas did not have. With all the doping, his willpower was about 11/8, which was lower than Thomas's, but he didn't use it to its full potential. He knew that using all his strength at once was a skill that could only be achieved after years of training, and he decided to use the pressure to his advantage. After all, if he was as desperate as Thomas, he would get tired just as quickly. The trick to not getting tired from incredibly difficult tasks was to make it a habit. He sat down near the stone and began to slowly lift it. The spectators laughed, not understanding what he was doing, but he understood that this was how bodybuilders maintained their vigor, by lifting maximum weights every day. They turned the stress of lifting weights into daily repetitions that their bodies had become accustomed to. Lifting the stone slightly, he thought that it was just a stone, and that it was the same thing he did every day. Deadlifting was just a routine for him, like 15 hours of work. Then he had to straighten his back, squeeze his buttocks, breathe deeply, and pull in his stomach. He convinced himself to accept it with his whole body and focus his strength. Kang Ho-han clenched his thumbs and aligned his center of gravity. He was able to lift the stone even higher. He used his weightlifting skills, bending and straightening his legs to engage his upper body. Finally, he succeeded and lifted the magic stone above his head. The crowd cheered that he had done it and compared him to a bull. The Baron began counting down from 3 to 1 and was surprised that he had actually succeeded. After the countdown, Kang Ho-han threw the stone on the floor to show that he was done. The crowd cheered. Finally, they could all go home. Someone asked how he knew how to lift the stone, calling him a genius. The Baron, thinking that it was finally over, asked him his name. Hearing this question, he hesitated a little, and the audience thought that he had no name. Finally, he said his name was Kang Ho-han and thought that he would become the best again, and he would become the best in the kingdom of Raincall. But his legs were still shaking, and Kang Ho-han realized that his endurance was still low, so he decided to start training his lower body. After a while, Baron Bourgeois put a weapon to his shoulder and asked if he would always remember the weapon around his neck, and would he promise to sacrifice his life to protect this kingdom? Kang Gohan, meanwhile, thinking that this was not really his life, said he would swear. The Baron appointed him a knight of the kingdom of Raincall and said that his knightly surname would be Yellow, and he must serve the kingdom with valor. After that, the Baron told him to stand up and always remember his oath, and when Kang Ho-han stood up, he promised to seal this honor in his heart. People discussed how he had recently been a resident like them, and now he was a rider. Now he could say goodbye to the furnace at the factory, and he would be fed to his heart's content. The Baron said that according to the privilege given to new knights, Yellow could choose 2 people as his squires. In the crowd, one person whispered to another not to stare, because in a society with such a strict hierarchy, it was difficult to look into the eyes of people from different classes. Now Kang Go-han had become the one who chose. Squires obeyed knights, but it was still better than 15 hours at the factory. One of the spectators said that he thought the 9th team, which was in the same dormitory as him, had a better chance. And Knight Yellow, after thinking for a moment, said that his squire would be from the 9th team. It would be Commander Davis, and he would choose the second one later. Lieutenant Davis was very surprised. Kang Go-han thought that he was his father's friend and the only adult who cared about him. This man had saved more than one life, and thanks to him, Kang Go-han also got a second chance. Baron Bourgeois laughed at his decision not to take one person away from him and said that he would receive a gift. He presented him with a magical weapon, a Shapente, which was enchanted with magic that made it stronger and sharper, and for the townspeople, he arranged a day off. Looking at this gift, Kang Ho-han thought about how in his past life he was just as dirty, but he broke through the soil and became a mighty tree. Later, when Kang Ho-han was sleeping, his dorm mates woke him up, saying that he needed to get ready quickly or he would have to stay longer again. After a while, he was already at the factory, where he sometimes had to stay until midnight, but he didn't understand why he was there. Suddenly, one of the workers shouted that the furnace engine had exploded and the evacuation had begun. Another asked Yellow what he was doing and that they needed to run. He thought about how he was sure that yesterday he had become a knight and decided that it was a dream. At that moment, he woke up and realized that there was no need to run and that it was a dream. He hadn't slept so soundly in a long time and even forgot to take off his uniform. He saw an information window that announced that the magic stone was filling him with energy. Looking more closely, he realized that he had lost muscle mass and did not understand why it had decreased, but his mana and magical power had increased. He thought that this was the energy used by knights and wizards. Lifting weights built muscle, and perhaps lifting the magic stone strengthened magic. He tried to summon a storm, but it didn't work. Looking at himself, he thought it was strange because he had lost some muscle, but his body seemed stronger. He thought it was the effect of magical power. At that moment, his squire Davis entered the room and said it was time to go. He bowed, but Kang Ho-han approached him and said he had asked him not to be so formal with him. Davis wanted to object, but he said it had nothing to do with his family. Davis realized he was talking about him and said he hadn't heard the word family in a long time. Kang Go-han showed him his muscles, which were very tense, and asked if he looked like a real rider. He said it was impressive. Davis suggested that he go outside and look around and showed him the place where the knights trained. They were dressed in clothes made from monster skin. Their muscles were like those of beasts, and they had long weapons. The magical power and mana of these knights were several thousand times greater than his. Knights who were formerly commoners were given surnames according to their rank: yellow, green, blue, red, white, black, silver, and gold. Kang Go-han became yellow, and now he was curious how long it would take to catch up with them. Suddenly, someone put a hand on his shoulder and asked if he was the guy who passed the test. He saluted the person who approached him and introduced himself as Kang Go-han Yellow. The other person laughed and called him a yellow-bellied coward. He told the other knights present that they had a newcomer. They noticed his physique and said he had excellent shoulders. They asked if he had already embraced his new reality and was ready to jump into the giant. The knights told him that real hell awaited him and warned him not to be upset when he realized that he would not be able to control the giant after the test. He was very surprised because he thought that knights became riders immediately. The man who approached him first said that he had a red rank, and only those with white or black ranks officially become riders. One of the knights said that it was not enough to hold the stone to be trusted with a huge machine, and that there was a 3-month selection process ahead. Of course, not everyone would pass this selection process, and if he failed the test, he would not go to the Rider Academy, but to the Academy for ordinary knights like them. They said that he should accept the fact that he would become an ordinary knight because almost no one passed this test. It was even more difficult for commoners. The men said that becoming a knight is already a great success, and it is better for him to listen to his elders so as not to go through sweat and blood before it is too late. At that moment, Lieutenant Davis approached him and said that they needed to go because a senior knight was summoning him. Davis took him by the hand and led him away. Kang Ho-han thought that they might look like silly old men, but they were still stronger than him, and he had a long way to go. They were running when they suddenly saw a man and were a little frightened, and Davis fell to the ground. This man was lifting a magic stone, and Kang Go-han thought that he had barely lifted a stone the size of an egg, but this one looked like a watermelon. He seemed to be not a man but a beast, and Kang Go-han admitted that he had never seen such amazing muscles. His name was Kaltz Black, and his rank was Black. This was the surname of a real candidate for the riders. Judging by the stats window, the difference between them was small: 3 kilograms of muscle and 3% body fat. Kang Go-han thought that at his age, people usually became emaciated old men, but he looked perfect. Approaching him, Kaltz Black asked if it was him and told him to get in. He started to get dressed, and Kang Go-han thought that he hadn't even introduced himself, that he wanted to look the same. A semi-automatic carriage was waiting for them, and Davis said on the run that it moved faster than usual thanks to steam traction. Getting inside, Kang Go-han said that it looked medieval, but the engineering technology was impressive. He compared it to a large camping vehicle. The driver pulled the lever, shouting that they were leaving, and immediately spurred the horses on. After a long pause, Kang Go-han said that they would probably be spending a lot of time together, but he didn't even know the knight's name to address him properly. Kaltz Black replied that he could just call him sir until they got to know each other better. He said that the road to the training center would take 5 days, and that they were now leaving the safe zone. The carriage raced down the road, and he continued, saying that they had to be very careful outside and that the slightest step or touch of the wrong stone was dangerous. Standing up, he said that he had to follow orders without question, and if there were no orders, he should do nothing and ask no questions. Throwing him a magic stone, Black said that they would continue training even on the road and that he would not have the strength to ask questions. He gave Yellow the task of lifting the stone 30 times above his head, then doing 30 squats, 3 minutes in a horse stance, and running 300 meters on the spot. As he began training, Kang Go-han wondered if he had angered him with his question. After all, he just wanted to know his name, even though he had already seen it. He lifted the stone several times with effort, thinking that it must be due to its magical power. He could repeat it several times, but he still didn't quite understand. Throwing the stone, he realized that training for the first time in 19 years and studying at the same time was not so easy. Kaltz Black, who was watching him, said that he had shown him the method, but that the correct execution of the exercise depended on him. Kang Go-han didn't understand what he meant because he hadn't said anything. He himself had asked not to be disturbed, but was watching him for some unknown reason. Davis suddenly jumped up on the sofa and scared him, saying that something strange was happening outside. They looked out the window and saw the bourgeois mine. The whole sky was covered with dark smoke coming from the mountain, which was swelling, spewing steam, and vibrating. At first glance, it looked like an active volcano, but steam was even coming from the trees. Could these be the consequences of the great battle? Fragments of the bodies of gods, demons, and dragons, a world created after they departed for the afterlife? Kang Go-han had a feeling that there were sources of energy everywhere that lived their own lives. It became clear why mechanical engineering was so advanced in this era. At that moment, Davis grabbed him by the shoulder and asked him what was wrong. He replied that he had suddenly lost his breath. Kang Go-han himself felt as if the force of gravity had doubled and was delighted by this. Kaltz Black laughed and said that he should not be surprised. He clarified that this was apparently a zone of high gravity, and Black confirmed his guess. Black explained that the cause of the anomaly was the core, and if it was not destroyed, humans would not survive. Therefore, they only existed outside their territory. Now, Kang Go-han understood why the giant riders were so important. They were necessary for destroying the cores. Kaltz Black was surprised that he understood immediately because such insight was hard to find among commoners. But he thought it would be difficult for him to become a rider. After all, if a person had not received an education from childhood, it was almost impossible to quickly increase their strength, and he mentally decided that Kang Go-han would soon understand the despair he felt. Kang Go-han realized that he needed to stimulate his muscles to feel magical power, and the high gravity zone was ideal for training. He picked up the stone again, thinking that now it wasn't just weight that mattered, and that he needed to listen to his body and let the mana flow through him. He forced himself to ignore the pain in his muscles, convincing himself that magic was beyond the physical body and that he had to focus on the mana. Kang Go-han tried again and felt as if he had been thrown into lava and his feet were burning. It was very difficult, but he made an effort because he understood that he must not give up. He counted to 3, his heart pounding like crazy, but then it began, and he felt the movement of power through his legs. It moved up his entire body, and he felt it absorbing magical power. The system notified him that he had felt mana for the first time, and that his magical power was accelerating. Black was surprised that a beginner felt the power on his first day. Kang Go-han was happy that he had succeeded and decided to try again. It was already the 3rd day, and Davis told him that he needed to conserve his strength, so that he wouldn't arrive at the training center exhausted. But Kang Gohan thought that he was training not only his muscles, but also his magic. The mana that had recently felt like a thin thread now resembled a spider's web. After doing another set, he replied that now was the best time to train. Finally, his magical power had increased 21 times, and he decided to take a break to restore his willpower and mana. Kang Gohan's muscle mass had decreased by 400 grams, but his strength had increased by 1 unit, and he believed that now he was quite a strong weakling. Magic allowed him to go beyond the limits of the human body and achieve the perfect form. What if he added magic to his training? He would have a divine body, but there was a problem. In the process of accumulating, mana, fat, and muscle mass were burned. The bodybuilder's pride did not allow him to give up his muscles, and eating food was also part of his training. Suddenly, the cart swayed, and Davis barely managed to stay on his feet. Kang Gohan realized that they had left. They had left the high-pressure zone, and Davis could finally breathe normally. Kang Gohan clutched his head, because training under pressure was his favorite. But Davis warned him that it would turn him into a monster. The carriage swayed again, and they thought they had entered the high-gravity zone once more. But then the driver appeared and, turning to the night, reported that there was an ambush and goblins were approaching. Cults Black, who had been sleeping peacefully all this time, replied that it was very annoying. During the great battle, the gods, demons, and dragons hated each other and sent each other to the other world. As a result of these battles filled with blood and flesh, monsters began to appear. Kang Gohan thought he could see them for himself and looked out the window with Davis. There he saw goblins approaching the carriage, each with a magical power of 700, and the normal strength of goblins was 10 times greater than that of an ordinary human. They were like vicious gorillas, smoking like armor just taken out of the furnace. Leaning out of the carriage, the driver began shooting at the monsters and hit one of them. The goblin fell, but after a while, Kang Gohan was surprised to see that it had risen again. Apparently, the bullet wasn't powerful enough, but its speed was also insane. Meanwhile, Cults Black finally woke up and, revealing the weapon hidden in his glove, got out of the carriage. His magic power was 5,873, and he quickly dealt with all the monsters. Looking out the window, Kang Gohan admired the greatness of the Black Knight. Davis asked how he knew he was black. He said he would tell him later. Suddenly, the travelers heard strange sounds coming from the forest and the trees shaking. A group of goblins resembling a pack of rabid dogs was approaching them. It seemed as if someone was chasing them, and they began to peer into the forest. When they saw that an ogre was following them, they all thought it was bad. When he saw the information window, Kang Gohan couldn't believe the numbers and thought his eyes were deceiving him. His muscle mass was 950 kilograms, and his magical power was 15,000. Realizing that the goblins were apparently using them as bait, the men decided to change the direction of the cart. Cults Black told the driver to take them back to the road and then return to the roof, while he began to prepare large-caliber weapons. He started shooting at the goblins but realized that they could only slow them down, and there were too many of them. Black yelled at the driver to keep shooting at anyone who approached. The driver asked what he himself was going to do. He was going to cut off the ogre's leg so that it would stop chasing them. Kang Gohan thought that the difference in strength between them was still too great. Black's magical power was 3 times less, and his normal power was 50 times less. The ogre was comparable to 1,000 adults, and no matter how strong the knight was, it was still too dangerous. Before he could think that they needed some kind of tactic, Black looked inside and asked for his booster. Handing him the booster, Kang Gohan asked if he could help in any way. He replied that he would help if he didn't get out of the carriage. After all, it was his job to deliver him safely. After strapping on his booster, preparing his weapon, and activating his magical abilities, Black prepared to attack. He told the driver that he would attack the ogre and the goblins would also scatter, but until then, he must protect the carriage at all costs. Black jumped out of the carriage, and the driver thought that he must have a gift. It seemed that the knight could control the wind. Kang Gohan thought that a gift was a supernatural power that only a few knights had awakened, and perhaps his window of information was also a gift. The driver continued shooting and said that fate was on their side, and that victory was assured for the knight with the gift, and today, only the goblins would lose. Soon, flying over the monsters' heads, Cults Black landed behind the fence and attracted his attention. The ogre turned around, preparing to attack, but Black jumped aside and said that he was moving too slowly and that he was already somewhere else. Looking at this, Kang Gohan said that Black was faster than him. Davis couldn't even see the movements. Although the ogre was strong without speed, it was completely useless. Meanwhile, Black was distracting the ogre and dealing with the goblins at the same time. His plan worked, and after a while the pursuers fell behind the cart. Seeing this, Black shouted that the time had come and it was time to start the main game. The ogre attacked him with his weapon, but Black jumped out of the way in time. Jumping at his opponent from the other side, he struck and hit his leg. Kang Gohan was delighted to see that he had hit his target, and Davis said that the weapon had hit the mark. But Black turned around and thought that this couldn't be. His body was like metal, and his weapon left only a scratch on his opponent's leg. And then he noticed that the ogre had become enraged. His skin began to tighten, and his body began to swell. The monster began to attack, becoming much faster, and Black could barely dodge his blows. The ogre struck again, and Kang Gohan and Davis, who were watching, began to worry about the knight. At that moment, the driver saw a goblin approaching them. He didn't understand why it hadn't run away with the others. Apparently, it was targeting the cart. He started shooting at it, shouting for it not to come closer, and that this time it wouldn't dodge. He managed to hit the goblin and it fell, but at the last moment it caught hold of the roof and climbed back up. Deciding that it could break the carriage, the driver started hitting it with another weapon to make it let go. Kang Gohan, who was looking out the window, decided that if they didn't deal with him, they would be finished. Realizing that he had to do something, Kang Gohan rushed for his weapon. Seeing that the goblin had already climbed onto the carriage and was ready to attack the driver, he knew he had only one chance. He prepared to attack and needed to concentrate all his magic into one strike. It was his one and only PM. Meanwhile, the ogre attacked Black with weapons emanating from his body. Black barely managed to dodge the attacks, and at one point thought that now it was his turn to give it his all. Quickly running up to the ogre from behind, he said he wasn't done and had one more strike left. Meanwhile, Kang Gohan focused and struck the goblin that had attacked the driver with his weapon. The driver yelled at the monster to leave him alone, pushed it away, and noticed that the goblin had already been defeated. Davis, who was watching Black's actions from the window, warned that the knight's gift had helped, and the ogre could no longer catch up with them. Jumping back onto the cart and seeing the defeated goblin, Black asked if Kang Gohan had done it, and if he had used magical power. Meanwhile, he was thinking about how he had been able to release all his mana at once for the first time. The mana had been used to its limit, and the magical power was developing faster. Inside the cart, bandaging his wounds, Black thought it was strange that ogres had appeared in this area, but even stranger was that the newbie had sent the goblin to the other world. After all, it hadn't even been a week since this puppy had touched the magic stone. He even thought that maybe he was a genius. And then Kang Gohan turned around and asked him what to do with the goblin's lifeless body. Black replied that it was his prey, and he could sell it at the training center. Monster bodies don't rot, so he could leave it there. Kang Gohan was surprised that they didn't rot and asked if he could eat it. Black replied that eating such meat to increase magical power was just a rumor. He had tried it himself but got indigestion, so it was not worth doing. But he replied that everything would be fine with him because his gift was an information window about nutrition, and that was the main ingredient in magical compounds. It was a kind of protein, because magical power also had a dietary supplement that promoted growth, just like muscles. Black thought about why he should try to convince him, and that it was none of his business if he made himself worse. After a while, he was already frying the meat, and the information window told him how long it would take for the toxicity to be eliminated. Finally, the information window signal disappeared, and everything was ready. Kang Gohan gritted his teeth and was ready to swallow the meat to increase his magical power. Taking a bite, he didn't understand the taste he felt at first. Davis said that it probably wasn't tasty, and who would even think of eating monsters? Black smirked. He knew that this meat was like shoe leather. Indigestion was supposed to start in 3 minutes, but that was far from the worst of it. But Kang Gohan was surprised to find that he hadn't tasted anything like this in 19 years. It was a 2-second miracle. It was during this interval that the taste unfolded. After eating one piece, he said he wanted more and took another. This surprised those present so much that their eyes bulged. Black thought that he could already use magical power and calmly eat monster meat, and did not understand what Kang Gohan was. Kang Gohan offered some to Davis and the driver, but the smell was similar to fermented soybean paste and durian, so they refused. Then Black agreed to try it, even though he was not very hungry. The other men decided that if the gentleman was going to eat it, then they would too, and they took a plate of meat. After tasting the meat, Black was surprised to find that it was the best sauce and the meat melted in his mouth, and the aftertaste on the tip of his tongue was the only proof that he had eaten it. And even though it was similar to alien cuisine, he still couldn't believe it. It felt as if a magical power was awakening. Kang Gohan, eating another piece, told them to enjoy it because he wouldn't be giving them any more. At that moment, the knight gave his name as Kaltz Black and said he could just call him Kaltz. He said that Kang Ho-han had made a significant contribution and that he would give him another goblin when they got there, and it wasn't that he wanted more meat. Lieutenant Davis looked at him and thought he had become more talkative and decided that meat was the best remedy for a bad mood. After a while, Kang Ho-han was training again, and Black thought he was changing every day and felt his magical power increasing. He accidentally said out loud that he might be a monster. Kang Ho-han turned around and asked what he had said, but Black replied that he hadn't said anything. Then he asked Sir Calls if he would return to his duties when this assignment was over. He clarified that he was talking about the giant riders, as it seemed to him that the white and black ranks could officially control them. Kaltz Black sat with his head bowed and remained silent, and then Kang Go-han thought that it seemed that everything was not so simple, and apparently he was angry. Finally, Black broke the silence and said that he had been expelled from the academy. Kang Go-han was very surprised by this. He said that during the mission, they were attacked by the Kingdom of Logo. There was an order to retreat, but he ignored it to save his friend. As a result, he failed and lost the giant. Disobedience is a serious crime, and his expulsion was inevitable. He spoke about the giant, saying that losing the machine was like a bird losing its wings. And so he asked Knight Yellow Kang Go-han never to repeat his mistake and to be much more careful. As he left, Black said that they would arrive tomorrow, so he should stop training and check his condition. Looking at him, Kang Go-han thought that it was melancholy, because deep down he wanted to return to his former life and his muscles. After a while, he was doing some stretching. Davis said that he had been told not to train today and that it was time to get dressed. Looking out the window, they saw a group of workers operating a huge machine. They realized that they had finally arrived at the training center, the place where raiders were trained and giants were created. Kang Ho-han climbed out of the hatch and saw a giant machine whose power was comparable to that of the gods. Getting out of the carriage, Black announced that a candidate from Baron Bourgeois, Sir Kang Go-han Yellow, had arrived. He showed the royal examiner's certificate. Meanwhile, he stood and looked at the giant, which was 8 meters tall, like a 3-story building. It looked more like a living beast than a machine. A man emerged from the giant, and Kang Go-han saw that his name was Rafal White, and that he had almost 3,000 points of magical power. He realized that this was, of course, a white-ranked official cadet rider. He looked to be about 20 years old, but his characteristics were on par with those of a 30-year-old knight. Taking the documents, Rafal White ordered the trainees to line up on the training ground. Standing in line, Kang Go-han thought he had returned to the army. And then he saw people in front of him and became curious about who these spectators were. Perhaps they were trainees and escorts who had arrived earlier. Then he saw that hundreds of people had gathered around the giant, and they all had stern looks on their faces. The men sitting on the giant discussed that it was the last group's turn. They were curious to see how many newcomers would pass in the end. Rafal White, introducing himself as the training center instructor, welcomed the last group of 13 people. He said that their actions would determine whether they would move on or become temporary guests. The entrance test began, and one by one they had to sit in the giant and take off. Kang Go-han was surprised. He didn't know there would be an entrance test. He looked at Black, who didn't say anything to him, and realized that this was why he had to stop training. Starting to get angry, he thought about how many tests there would be if he was now a cadet candidate, and they should teach takeoff before starting practice. Then someone behind him said that he was obviously a commoner, as it was written on his sloppy face. Kang Go-han turned around to see who was adding fuel to the fire. It was a girl who introduced herself as Lowen Yellow and asked his name. He introduced himself as Kang Go-han Yellow. She explained that landing in a giant synchronization and activation is takeoff, and added that poor people don't know that. After her words, Lowen Yellow smiled, made a gesture with her hands, spreading her fingers, and said that this is how it should be done. Kang Go-han did not understand that this was possibly a way of greeting among free people, intertwining their fingers when meeting for the first time. Making the same gesture, he reached out his hands to her, but Lowen, angered, asked what he was doing, and that he could lose his hands. Crouching down, she said that he should put his hands on the bottom of the cabin. This would synchronize the rider's power with the giant, and the engine would start. She said that after that, enormous pressure would be exerted, and once he had overcome it, he should stand up and the takeoff would be complete, thus completing the synchronization. Kang Go-han listened to her words in surprise, and she finally said that this way, the rider and the giant would become one. Lowen added that this way, the giant would repeat his movements and he would see the world through its eyes. Patting him on the shoulder, she said that he didn't need to worry. His magical power would be enough. At first, she thought he wasn't poor. He thought that she could probably sense magical power. He thanked her and asked how she knew all this. She replied that her family had a great passion for education and that she had touched a magic stone at the age of 14. Lowen advised him to take a closer look at their rivals, a group of 13 people. Among them, only 4 stood out, including them. Pointing to one young man, she said that at first glance he looked strong and was almost 2 meters tall, and his name was Kurold, she thought. Pointing to another young man, she said that he was quite handsome but had a sharp gaze. His name was Harcrux, and he was also from a poor family, but he had accumulated enough magical power and his concentration was excellent. Listening to Lowen, Kang Gohan did not understand how she obtained this information. Meanwhile, she said that the test was about to begin and suggested that they watch. Before the test began, Rafal White instructed them to remember one thing, not to lose their minds, and pressed the projector button. An image from the cockpit appeared, and Rafal White warned that they could suffer serious injuries or even death. He said that when takeoff began, they would be subjected to tremendous pressure, and at first it would seem as if they were suffocating, and then their heads would spin. They would have to decide whether they were capable or not. If they felt they were losing control, it would be better to abort the takeoff. He added that it was better to fail the exam than to go to the other world, and that only the best of the best ever became riders. There was no shame in failure, and he said it was better not to try to overcome what they did not understand. Giants are fighting machines that imitate gods, created in their likeness using ancient knowledge, and today they would understand what it meant to gain their power. Finally, it was time to take off, and Rafal White told the examinee to put both hands on the floor. The first examinee, as instructed, squatted down, and putting his hands on the floor, immediately felt a powerful pressure. It became increasingly difficult for him to breathe, and he was already struggling to inhale and exhale. Looking at the screen, Kang Gohan thought that it was similar to what he had seen in his past life. It was the L breathing method used by fighter pilots. The acceleration of such aircraft was terrifying for the pilot, who was subjected to pressure 9 to 10 times greater than normal. The pilot tensed all the muscles in his body and accelerated blood circulation to counteract this pressure. This was how a force that exceeded human capabilities was controlled by people. It was like riding a giant confronting a divine force. A short time passed, and the examinee could hardly breathe and asked to stop the test. While he was being unloaded from the giant, Rafal White said that he was a good man, and that even though he had given up, he would still remain a knight because the life of each of them was precious. He invited the next examinee, but after a while he also gave up and withdrew. Looking at his suffering, Kang Ho-han thought that they, like him, were lifting a magic stone, and apparently this task was very difficult. It was the next person's turn, and Kurold headed for the giant. He was promising, as Lowen said, and Kang Ho-han was curious to see if it was true. It was also very difficult for him, but Kurold was successful, and the giant took flight. Kang Gohan and Lowen rejoiced at this success, and she was also happy that she had guessed correctly. The giant rejoiced with Kurold, and Kang Gohan thought that this was the joy of becoming one with the giant. And then everyone watching this event saw Rafal White get into the giant. He did it in just 10 seconds, while Kurold had been groaning for more than 2 minutes. Once inside the giant, Rafal White congratulated the cadet on joining, and now he had to try to block his attacks. The others were very surprised that it was so sudden, and how a newcomer who had just taken off could repel the attacks of a White-ranked pilot. And White's giant was already rushing into the attack. He made one strike and then a second. Finally, he delivered the decisive blow, and Kurold's giant remained lying on the ground. Rafal White said that they already had one entrant, and now there were only 9 people left. Kang Gohan did not understand how it was possible to attack so roughly, even after a successful test. He thought that he wanted to destroy morale and intimidate everyone. Finally, Rafal White gave the command to continue the exam. Everyone watched the next candidate trying to overcome synchronization. It was becoming increasingly difficult for him to breathe under such pressure, and the others thought it would be better for him to give up. After a while, he fell. Suddenly, the security system sounded an alarm indicating that an emergency had occurred, and the riders rushed to help. But as soon as they entered the giant, they realized it was too late. The examinee had passed away. Seeing his lifeless body being carried out on a stretcher, Kang Gohan wondered if he could handle it himself. The atmosphere in this place was completely different, and these people were not like the idiots from the Baron's castle. Among their group, 1 was seriously injured, 5 had minor injuries, and 1 had passed away, but they did not waver at all. They had the willpower that could not be shaken by failure, even if something terrible awaited them ahead. When it was the next person's turn, Harcrux volunteered to go. Kang Gohan watched him calmly enter the giant and thought that it was probably politeness to those who had failed and that he would not run away. Soon, Rafal White reported that Harkrux was the second to pass, and he had completed the ascent in 1 minute and 40 seconds, surpassing Kurul. Rejoicing in his victory, Lowen told Kang Ho-han that she had said he was a natural rider. While Harkrux was preparing for White's giant attacks, Kang Ho-han thought that by digesting his previous failures, his strategy had been refined. None of the failed guys were left here, but they had achieved everything together. White began to attack, and in the end, Harkrux's giant, after withstanding 4 blows, fell to the ground. Kang Go-han believed that this was hazing that trampled on success and absurd boasting of power, and he mentally promised Raphael White that he would also contribute to the success of the newcomers and let him try his punch. Davis, meanwhile, sat in the stands and watched the exam. Suddenly, a young man bumped into him and apologized, saying he was so small. He turned around, and the young man, seeing his face, said that he was just another old squire who was supposed to defend him, but couldn't even lift a spoon. He and his friend decided that he was the squire of the last poor knight, and they laughed at the fact that he had chosen an old man, calling him crazy. Davis got angry, stood up, and asked what they had said. They began to laugh at the old man's anger and told him to relax, or his blood pressure would rise. 2 other young men intervened and asked what they were doing, and if they weren't being too rude. But they started a fight and said that they were the White Knight's squires, and that they didn't understand why the Yellow Knight's servants were opening their mouths. One of them grabbed the young man who had stood up for Davis by the hair and said that this was the jungle, and if he didn't have the strength, he should kneel obediently. Davis, who was watching this, thought about his words about the jungle, and that it was no worse than working 15 to 18 hours a day in hard labor. He had seen a lot in the Baron's castle, for example, how people were sent to the other world in a blast furnace. But this was not a battlefield where weapons were a must. Davis said that maybe he wasn't too old yet and had a sharp tongue. He asked if it turned out that not only knights had ranks, but also squires. Since they were so confident, he offered to make a bet and put 5 silver coins on his knight to pass and take first place. They accepted his offer, saying that it was probably a month's salary, and one of them bet on Lowen, who was educated and from a free family. Looking at the coins in his hand, Davis thought that it wasn't a month's salary, but what he had saved his whole life. But now what mattered was the image of a man who had developed every day and defeated a goblin with 1 blow, and the surprised face of Kaltz Black. And Lieutenant Davis, hoping for Kang Go-han, decided to go all in. The others thought that the poor old man had bet all his money on a poor man. Meanwhile, Lowen looked at Kang Go-han and said that he had a scary look in his eyes, and that this was probably his firm determination. But she said that today they would have to give in, and pointed to 2 people who, according to her reliable information, had taken the first 2 places even before they arrived. She pointed to one of these newcomers named Giraud Yellow, who took second place because he held out against Raphael for a minute. First place went to Helena Yellow, who held out for 1.5 minutes and even tried to counterattack once. Of course, Raphael dodged her blow, but still took a step back, and Lowen considered this an amazing result. Then, winking at Kang Go-han, she said that she would be today's heroine because she would force Raphael to retreat 2 steps. He looked at her stats. Her mana was 59.7, and her magical power was 573. She was really strong, but it was still less than the others, and he wondered if it was possible to overcome this difference with skill. Entering the giant, she took a breath, and soon Raphael said that the takeoff was 1 minute and 20 seconds, which was the best result in this group. Raphael and the giant began to attack Lowen, but she was able to avoid the first blow and ended up holding out for 45 seconds. Although she was unable to counterattack, she defended herself and dodged 17 attacks, and it was a good fight. Kang Go-han mentally thanked Lowen because this would make it easier for him to control the giant. He was certain that if Rafal moved, the game would be over. After all, if you defend yourself from the first attack or dodge the next ones, you won't be able to respond. And there was a difference in ability and experience between them. The probability of him being beaten was high. Helena, who dismissed this and tried to attack, was simply a monster. But could he do it? His magical power was 107, which he had managed to increase in just a few days. But his mana was only 1/5 of Lowen's. While he was warming up, he thought about how his magical power growth had slowed down when it exceeded 100. It seemed that the situation was similar to muscle growth, but neither Garroth nor Helena could have defeated the goblin, and he defeated it, and even Sir Kaltz was surprised by this. He understood that fighting was not just about numbers, and if he struck at a weak spot and luck was on his side, Kang Go-han could do it, and he needed to focus. Kang Gohan concentrated and confidently entered the giant. Once inside, he immediately smelled the scent of blood, iron, and oil. The door slammed behind him and he looked around. The space inside was about 7 square meters. But he had the feeling that behind this darkness there was only a boundless universe. Then Rafal told him to start taking off. He thought that Rafal hadn't explained anything, and that he just needed to touch the floor with his hands to understand. Touching the floor with his hands, Kang Gohan felt pressure and realized that it was the same pressure he felt when he squatted with a weight of 200 kilograms. But he remembered this routine well because he had encountered it a million times in his past life. He took a deep breath and tensed his abdominal muscles. Pressure began to build on his abdominal cavity, and he had to resist the weight, but still it felt like something else. Not just simple heaviness, because it wasn't just his bones and muscles that were tense. It was the highest level of pressure, as if even his soul was being pulled to the bottom. But it was not like pressure from above. Kang Gohan had the impression that a giant was absorbing mana, as if creating a vacuum. He realized that he needed to feel the magical power, because that was the only way to cope with such pressure. Kang Gohan tried to gather his entire body and squeeze out his mana. Finally, he felt the giant's heart, a pulsating unknown force. This force grew, and like a pump pumping water, Kang Gohan pumped it out in one breath without hesitation and without losing strength. It felt as if his whole body was falling apart, but he made one more effort. Finally, he succeeded, and synchronization with the giant took place. Even Cults Black watched this process. It was a success, and in less than a minute, those present began to ask if he was not one of the poor. Kang Gohan opened his eyes and rejoiced in his victory. It was sweet for him. He looked at the people below and realized that now he could see everything through the eyes of the giant. Freed from his small and weak human body, he felt superior, as if he had become a god. He had a feeling of omnipotence, capable of destroying even the most enormous mountain. It was an ecstasy similar to honey being poured into his brain. But he stopped these thoughts. He needed to pull himself together because he had only one chance to right Raphael. Considering the previous results, the game would be over if Raphael moved, and he had only one attempt. Loan, for example, had strong mana, but her willpower was similar to his, and she divided and used her mana 17 times. But Kang Gohan decided to do things differently, using all his willpower at once. He was going to release his mana to the limit. He just had to seize the moment. He remembered that Raphael's takeoff time was 10 seconds. That was enough time for a surprise attack, and the giant rushed forward. From inside his giant, Rafal said it was worth trying something else, but Kang Gohan's giant had already attacked, and he fell to the ground. There was a loud crash, and the people present tried to take cover from the dust that rose. This is how a newcomer sitting in a giant for the first time was able to defeat a white-ranked cadet. And although Rafal was caught off guard, it would be a big blow to him when he came to. Therefore, Kang Gohan decided to stop there because his mana was already running out. But Raphael's comrades thought it was cheating, and that it couldn't be that a newbie who was supposed to be intimidated had humiliated Raphael. They said that he attacked like a coward and decided to run away, and that he shouldn't look down on his seniors, and they decided to go and deal with Kang Gohan. But at that moment, he was thinking that this was official hazing meant to break the spirit of newcomers, and he believed that this result was enough. Raphael's comrades headed towards him to show him what real hazing was. The spectators in the stands decided that it would be interesting. Seeing a group of people coming towards him, Davis shouted about it to Kang Gohan. He finally turned around and saw several men running towards him. He proudly thought that they wanted to congratulate him, but laughed, and said that there was no need for that. But at that moment, Raphael's giant gestured to his comrades to stop. Climbing out of the giant, he asked the intern's name, and he introduced himself as Kang Gohan Yellow. He said he would remember, and turning around, told the others to arrange a place for him to spend the night. The men were angry and did not understand why Raphael had decided to just leave, and they threatened Kang Gohan that they would see about that. When they all left, he breathed a sigh of relief because it had not been easy for him, and he had used all his strength at once. Sitting on the ground, he thought about how fighting against the pressure that could destroy him was terrifying. He remembered the moment when he had exhausted all his mana, and then the whole world had turned into a small dot. At that moment, the body and mind disappear from a person, leaving only willpower and a feeling of satisfaction, as if he had touched God. He looked at Sir Kultz. Now it was clear what that longing was, and perhaps his action would be the right decision. Meanwhile, the squires were discussing whether there had ever been an intern who had defeated a white rank on the entrance test, but no one had heard of such a thing. But it wasn't just about rank, because they said that Rafal was the strongest of them all. Some even believed that he would soon become black. One of the squires said that they had lost a lot of money in the bet. Another replied that there was nothing to worry about and that they should just ignore him. He believed that he would not do anything to them. Another young man said that it was true because a yellow-ranked squire had to pay white-ranked squires. And they decided to leave before the old man started nagging. But at that moment, Colts Black appeared behind them and asked where they were going. Turning around, they were surprised to see a knight approaching them. Colts Black asked why they were now placing bets in the sacred training center. Frightened by the realization that this was a black-ranked knight, they said it was just a little game between squires. Black said that games were fine because he wasn't a very strict person either. He asked if they had played with that old man Davis. The young men asked how he knew his name, and Black replied that they had met a couple of times riding in a carriage and dealing with goblins. He asked them if they were going to follow the rules of the game, to which they replied that only people without honor break their promises. They thought it was probably a threat and didn't understand why the Black Knight decided to intervene at all. Black said that some jokers who don't understand words have their ears cut off and asked if they were listening carefully. As soon as he said this, the squires rushed from the stands after Davis, shouting that they were looking for him. Watching the young men run away, Colts Black remembered the day he disobeyed the order to retreat. He remembered his friends shouting at him to run faster because they could buy some time with the golems. Everyone ran into the bunker to wait for reinforcements, but Black ran in the other direction and could not be stopped. Disregarding orders, he climbed into his giant and ran, mentally asking his friend to hold on a little longer, but he did not make it in time. Later, the commander told him that since he had disobeyed orders, he must take responsibility, and that riders were more important than ordinary people. Disobedience was a serious crime, and he was expelled and had to return the giant. Sitting on his giant for the last time, he apologized to his classmates and to him for not being able to protect them. He thanked the giant for being with him and said that his principles were also the giant's principles. Looking into the bag containing 90 silver coins, Davis thought that this was 18 times more than he had saved in his entire life. He laughed at his good fortune because he had made the bet in anger and had thought he would lose the money. King Ho-Han approached him and asked where it came from and what all these people were doing there. Davis handed him 45 silver coins, saying that it was his share and he would only take half. Kang asked why he needed so much. He replied that he had heard that knights constantly lose money. Kang Ho-Han agreed because they had to pay taxes. At that moment, a man approached them and, introducing himself as a supply soldier, said he would take him to his place of residence. Kang Ho-Han realized that he had acted officially, but asked him to wait a moment and walked away. At that moment, Colts Black was thinking that perhaps everything could have turned out differently if Kang Go-Han had been able to develop at a faster pace. Kang Go-Han approached him and asked what he was looking at. Black replied that the weather was nice, and added that he was no longer obliged to train him. He said that now he needed to follow the instructions of the training center, and Kang Go-Han said that he wasn't sure but wanted to try. He said that the ecstasy during takeoff and the feeling of omnipotence were impossible to forget once you had experienced them, and so he asked Black to join him as his squire. Black got angry and said that he was crazy. Holding out a bag of money, Kang Ho-Han said it was a deposit and that he was betting on Sir Kal's abilities. But then he realized that wasn't the problem. So he said he would let him control the giant. He would become a truly outstanding rider, and his squires would also be granted permission. Clutching his head, Black asked what he was talking about. He said that a rider who disobeyed orders would never be able to ride a giant again. Kang Go-Han replied that there were no unbreakable rules and that he would be the one to rewrite them. He asked Sir Kaltz if he would bet on him. As a result of the exam, out of 500 Yellow Knights, 78 passed the test. Lowen pointed to the so-called public dining room, which was located under the chief's tower. There, they served the famous dishes of the training center. Everyone was curious about when they would be fed, and on the way they marveled at the excellent view. Seeing the sunset, Lowen was delighted and said that you could even see the land beyond the district. The coach forbade them to leave the dining hall and market area and said that they would gather at this place after the 7th bell rang. He also said that they could eat in peace, but if they were late, he would make them show everything they had eaten. Kang Go-Han thought that there must be dark mana in the training center's dining room that helps with development. After all, even eating is training. The coach looked at him and thought that this was the trainee who had sent Raphael flying. The cadets rushed to the food, all so tired that they wanted to relax a little. Suddenly there was a noise, and at first no one understood what it was. But then Lowen saw the newcomer, Giraud. He had apparently bumped into Harkrux and was now standing there swearing that they had apparently just decided to shut up and eat. Turning to Harkrux, he told him to open his eyes and asked if he was one of the poor. Then he added that beggars were getting on his nerves today. Harkrux got angry, asked him to repeat what he said, and rushed at him with his fists. But Jero dodged his blow. Turning around, he punched his opponent in the face, knocking him to the ground. He said it was worth clarifying that everyone with the surname Yellow was equal in rank. The other cadets, enraged, were ready to fight him and asked where he came from, calling him a lickspittle. They asked if he really thought he could do whatever he wanted just because he was a nobleman. They said he only opened his mouth because he had come in third place. Jero said they could come closer, and when they rushed to attack him, he easily scattered them in different directions. At that moment, Harkrux ran up behind him, but Jero noticed him and kicked him. He fell, and Gareth pressed his head to the ground with his boot and said that he was annoying him and now he would behave more quietly. He said that from now on they needed to be more careful, especially the poor, otherwise he would show them what class differences meant. The other cadets called for Kang Gohan, but he thought that now was not the time for that. Meanwhile, Kaltz Black looked out the window and told the director that there was some commotion outside, but the director replied that they were not yet official riders. The director offered him tea and said that they should sort things out themselves. Black realized that he was constantly training, and he replied that it was a habit. Looking at Kang Gohan, the director said he was amazing and asked how Black had taught him. He replied that he hadn't taught him and that it seemed like this kid had used up all his mana at once. The director laughed at the fact that he did such things with ease, even though he was from a poor family. He added that talent cannot be hidden anyway, and he understood why Black came to him himself. He decided to guess and said that Black had decided to accept the position of instructor, which he had previously refused, and he decided to accept this position because of this child. Black was silent for a while. He remembered how Kang Gohan had offered to become his squire, saying that he would make it so that even a squire could control a giant. Then he asked if he knew what he was talking about. Kang Gohan replied that he did not know, but from that moment on, he would find out. He said that he had lived in poverty for 19 years but had become a knight, and that it was not necessary to just go with the flow from now on. Black told him to take the money back, and he thought that he was refusing after all. He said that he was very surprised today that he could use mana freely even though he had lifted a stone a week ago, and that he could be considered a genius. But he clarified whether he used mana at once, and Kang Gohan asked how he knew. He replied that the method of using mana in one burst was the technique of the legendary rider, Gurpen Gallia, but you need to be sensitive to your strength. Kang Gohan thought that it was the same with muscles. It was not enough to build them up, you had to know how to use them. There is even a condition called gluteal amnesia, caused by the habit of sitting for long periods of time, when the muscles atrophy and sensitivity is dulled. And even though beginners in fitness do exercises for the glutes, these muscles are not stimulated at all, so all the load goes to the lower back and knees. Proper stimulation is important in exercise. For example, in chest exercises, you should feel like your chest is about to burst. It takes a long time to strengthen and properly control the motor nerves, but what about magical power? Kang Gohan understood that Black was saying that magical power cannot be controlled perfectly, but he did it. But Black replied that it was a huge risk to his life and not an easy decision. Black said that he had shocked him twice. The first time was when he defeated the goblin, and the second was when he knocked down the White Knight. He added that he could try to surprise him a third time, and if he proved that it wasn't just luck, he would accept his offer. Of course, both the one who offers such a thing and the one who agrees to it are crazy. The director realized that he had guessed correctly, and that Black wanted to keep him and watch him. Turning around, he said that wasn't the case. But pinning a badge on him, he said that no matter what the reason, it was a good choice. He believed that Black had once again found what made his heart beat. Turning around, the director waved to Black, saying that it was time for him to go, and that he had things to do. Meanwhile, Kang Gohan was studying information about Hero Yellow. His magical power was 669, which stunned him. He had 4 times more power and 6 times more mana. In addition, he had amazing fighting skills, and he would not be able to defeat him. At that moment, Lowen approached him and asked if he knew why Jero was behaving that way. He replied that the rich kid was angry that he had been surpassed on the test. He walked away and Lowen, angry, said that he knew everything but was leaving anyway. Kang Gohan replied that this was not the most important thing right now. As he walked away, he thought that poor people did not have time for games and that he would have to develop his magical power even in his sleep to close the gap. Right now, the most important thing for him was dark mana, and he tried to find it in the dining room. Lowen followed him and said that he was a coward, but that wasn't true. Staring at the food and realizing that something was wrong, Kang Go-han began to get angry, and Lowen asked him what he was looking for, but he didn't answer. There was too little food with dark mana in the dining room, and too much with light mana. He didn't know how to understand this, and didn't understand what spirituality in food was. Looking at what spirituality was, he realized that it was a form that mana turned into, and with its help, one could win the favor of creatures and animals. But if you overdo it, the magical power dulls, and the effectiveness drops. And he realized that it was the last fat to be excreted from the body. When Kang Ho-han realized that light mana was carbohydrates and that he would lose muscle, and accordingly, magical power, he grabbed his hair. But he figured out how to fix the situation, and after a while, he was already pulling a cart with goblin meat behind it. He was happy that he could eat whatever he wanted. The other cadets didn't understand how he could spend money to eat this meat and decided that he had gone mad. Kang Go-han began to cook meat, thinking that there was almost no dark mana in the cafeteria food, but plenty of light mana. It was a dangerous diet for riders. Of course, he understood that fat was necessary to cover large, beautiful muscles, and that carbohydrates were also necessary for gaining mass. But all this was needed after he had gained enough protein. And as he took a bite of meat, he decided to show everyone the power of proper nutrition.